Will blockchain make traditional finance obsolete? Are cryptocurrencies and stablecoins really the future of payments? Blockchain has evolved rapidly, with Bitcoin's price rising approximately 400% in the last 2 years. But nobody uses Bitcoin or any other altcoins to pay for any of their day-to-day needs. If we compare this with the adoption of artificial intelligence, a much larger portion of the population uses AI than either blockchain or crypto, even though AI has been available for a much shorter period of time. I really wanted to learn more about what was going on in blockchain payments, stablecoins, and how they are evolving. So we talked to someone who actually built his own stablecoin, Tianwei Liu, a co-founder of StraitsX, a Singapore-based payments company that is licensed by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. We discussed how stablecoins could bridge the gap between fiat and crypto, how blockchain can help businesses with payments, and how money is evolving. Thank you so much for coming to the show. Before we get to the main part of this conversation, let's get a little bit of your background, or a lot of your background, frankly, for some context.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for the invite. I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you.
Maybe just a quick background by myself. I'm an engineer by training, a computer science and electrical engineer to be exact.
Wow.
I started the company about 10 years ago. Actually, we just celebrate our 10 years since the start of the initial company. But I'm always an engineer and a geek at heart. Most of my folks here that have been working with me always says that I'm actually always doing only two things. I'm either at the front line trying to sell the vision and the product, or I'm at the back end trying to tinkling with some stuff that I usually mess up what others are doing. But I really enjoy that process.
Are you someone that really likes writing or at least reading code? Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. So it's arguable that I might write bad code, but I'm actually involved in a very big part of the code writing in the very early days. The first line of the code of the company was written by me because
Awesome.
these days you have GitHub, right? And you can literally see the command that I write, and always people was like joking around like that. The first few lines and the first maybe hundreds, tens of thousands of lines was written by me, and they deleted it. It's a lot of bullshit. People don't really like it. Yeah. And to the point, I think 5 years in, eventually people banned me from GitHub. I still have access. I can read it, but I can't push code anymore because there's a disastrous event that happened one time that just before some client demo, I decided to fix something.
Does it fix something? You put that in quotes. So what happened? Did it get really fixed before you did the client demo, or no? Did it kind of blow up?
Absolutely. I closed the sales, but I broke everything else for the rest of the clients. The engineering team hated me after that, and they're like, "Nah, ban this guy from the gate access." And from that day onwards, I lost ability to change the code. Yeah, but also great fun.
Yeah, maybe that's a better thing. I don't know, and I'm not making a value judgment about it, so don't hold it against
No.
me.
Absolutely. My CTO and the tech team still love me, I think. They love me more because I don't write any more code.
Yeah, fair enough. Look, 10 years ago was 2014, which is hard to say out loud. I don't even want to have that part of the conversation. But wow, 10 years ago, 2014. And actually, I was on a call yesterday or the day before with somebody. We were talking about Bitcoin itself. And I was like, what is it good for? Like, what can you use it for? And he was like, you can't think about it that way. And again, correct me where you think I'm wrong. He's like, if Bitcoin is the gold of digital assets, you have to think about it that way, right? And then I was thinking for our conversation, if that's the case, and tell me if it's not, right? How would you define stable coins? And can you maybe then give us a bunch of different use cases? Where do they fit in here?
Yeah, as I was mentioning earlier on that,
Yep.
I'm an engineer at heart. I'm actually proud of that identity. If there's anything that a lot of
I
time
love it.
people will talk about is we like to fix problem. We like to tinkle and try to look at what is under the hood, how to do things a bit better. So I started, as mentioned, I started a company 10 years ago. I was a software engineer then. Before I quit my job, so I was fortunate enough. I was born and raised in Singapore. My alma mater is National University of Singapore, NUS.
Awesome.
And they have a program, and it's actively, instructed by the Singapore government, which we like to do a lot of that. They send students like me overseas on an exchange program, and this program is called the NUS Overseas College. And it's like all Singapore, we like to do acronym for acronym. So National University of Singapore is called NUS. The program is NUS Overseas College. So in short, is NOC, right? So when I was explaining that to people, they were like, "No, this is crazy. You have an acronym for acronym." But yeah, so I did that. So I was being sent there. I think that was in 2010, 2011. during the hype of the dot-com bubble burst, I went to Stanford. I was in the Bay Area for a year. I was working on a startup company, working on plastic transistors. So I was an electrical and computer science engineer, right? So we're making e-ink displays flexible e-ink display, and I had a lot of fun working in the labs, making e-ink displays itself. But eventually, it was a small startup. I was employee 15. By the time I was leaving, they were like probably 90 people. But then when I go back to school, which was required, right, to graduate, iPad came out. So they didn't do very well immediately after. So, but I was fortunate enough to build the network, right? So the bosses started a new company, and they were graceful enough to hire me back, right? So eventually, after I graduated, I straight away started my career in the Bay Area. I'm just working as a software engineer, right? So I was working there as a software engineer, working on Android kernel. We're making plastics. In this case, the new generation of that was we're making a wearable smartwatch. So eventually, that company got acquired by Google. So the better story for this one is it didn't get killed by Google, right? It got
like Pebble.
It was that trial where Pebble was out. We were making this Android smartwatches based on the Android OS, and eventually, fortunately, that they got acquired by Google. But acquisition by Google is tough. I know there's immigration problems. I'm on a H1 visa. So thanks to the network, I found a job before the acquisition ended, and I ended up working at Amazon. So I was at Amazon about 3 years in total. And that's before I came back. So you see, the journey was really interesting, right? I was just a software engineer doing that. But during my time on Amazon is where the idea of to come back and start a company was started, because like all Asians and Singaporeans, Asian values about family and stuff. I have to come back every year, right? So I have to come back every year if my parents would disown me. And then during those back and forth, we found out that how different the two market. Like in Singapore, we were like being touted as where the Silicon Valley of this part of the world, right? And then it's supposed to be the most advanced tech hub of this region. And that was 10 years ago, right? And I was sitting on the pinnacle on both sides because I was transiting back and forth. And I keep seeing that, where everyone was then, there was a big push for fintech. Everyone was talking about developer experience, building up things. That was missing in Singapore. Yeah. And that's where we first started the company for, right? We thought, we're naively thinking that, hey, why can't payment? That was the story here, right? Because over one weekend, I was then working at Amazon, and Amazon Kindle Paperwhite came out. And it is a good device. Everyone love it. So my colleagues and friends and then in Singapore reach out to me and say, hey, can you just grab us one? And this is 10 years ago, right? Amazon wasn't in Singapore, and people wanted to buy this device. And then I say, sure, I got a bit of a 10% employee discount. You can figure out the FedEx, right? So I was just buying Kindle and then shipping it back to Singapore. And then before you know it, it comes to payment collection, which is a big part, right? And this joke that we always have been talking about, how the whole idea of X was started, was that, which is the original company where I founded, right? Was like, hey, when I was collecting payment, then it was the era of like instant messenger. We were like writing email, right? It's 2014, right? The messenger wasn't out yet. There's no WhatsApp as well. And I think there was MSN, something along those lines. And when I was collecting payment, I was so shocked that people don't even use the things that I was used to then in the Bay Area was like Venmo, PayPal. None of that exists in this part of the world. And
I didn't even think about it, but you're right. There was no Venmo, right? There was no way to do that.
And the way they would pay was like, hey, can I just bank transfer you? Literally, they would ask you for your bank account.
But even that was hard.
It was hard. It was pre the era of fast, right? So I think a lot of us were used to real-time payment. Then you don't even have that, right? You literally would just be sending money to some random guy on the internet. And you do it because he's your friend. And so my friend does that for me, right? So with Gyro, they take about 3 days. And the pain was that, I remember it was about 10 Kindle. I received 8 payment. And one of the payment was for twice the amount. So there was like one payment missing, and you couldn't figure out in hell, like, well, right? And that was Christmas. That was Christmas. I was doing that. And then by February, which is the Lunar New Year, I was coming back home to Singapore, which is what I do every single year. And people still couldn't figure out who haven't paid me, right? And I was like, this is frustrating. I can fix it. Yeah. And then we were talking about it, that the thesis then is that there's no tech. There's no API. We were like developers, right? If there was an API that allowed developer to innovate, comes in and build solution, you can do that in a weekend, right? And this thing could be solved. And that was the genesis of this, what we started from, right? We were just thinking that if we can build a better API, a lot more innovation can be happening, and the developers or entrepreneur around this part of the world will be able to build the same tech product. And one of the area that we were thinking was early days was block shop, because I was fascinated when I was jumping into this problem. I still remember that like there was starting the bloom of early e-commerce days, but no, we don't have Shopee, we don't have Lazada. Yeah. People were just starting internet website and they're selling whatever they can sell, right?
Also selling on Facebook too, at least in
exactly.
Thailand. Yeah.
And then you have people pasting their bank account details on those comment message and expect people to pay them. And they were like invoicing people just like this. It was chaos, but at the same time, amazing. Chaos. Yeah. So we thought that we can do a better job. It's like, hey, let me just figure out how to do that. So that was the back end for all of the genesis of the company. We think we can do payment better, but we have absolutely no idea then that how to even go about doing it. And we were engineers, right? We're just looking at the problem. And the first thing that we did is, instead of talking to the banks, which we do not know how to do, we built a solution around it. We started to build crawlers around internet banking. We engineered a solution out of this whole thing. And we started helping SMEs and online users accept automated internet banking payment. So that's started the whole company. Yeah.
2 questions that I want to ask you. I have to ask you right away. The first is, did you ever find out the guy that didn't pay you?
Yes, I did.
Good. Okay, that clears that one up. And second of all, what was this exact thing that you built? Was it an API suite? And why did you start with SMEs? Tell me a little bit more about this. And then I want to talk about the transition into StraitsX, which is probably like a souped up version of this. I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the joke was that the person didn't pay me because in the Chinese tradition, you can't owe people past the Lunar New Year, right? So I just blasting them, and someone like, oh yeah, I forgot to transfer. So that solved the problem. It was a funny reunion dinner. Yeah, but then you're right that the API side of this thing, how it started was because I was so from there I stumbled upon ladies, the blog shop ladies. I was like live journal. You guys still remember that thing that people used to blog, send a photo, and they were like, oh, we were hiring interns to basically do this customer support. And I was like, why do you hire the interns? Oh, their job is customer service, but actually 90% of their job is to just check my internet banking portal when somebody claimed that they have paid me and try to match one-to-one. That was the work that they were doing for a long period of time. And these sales can happen over a weekend, and you do hundreds of transactions. Can you imagine that manual work that's involved? So I was roped in one of this project, which was like, hey, I can solve this. I can automate. And what we do is not even talking to anybody, right? I was just figuring out, okay, you have a bank statement over here that's online. I can download the statement. I can build some way to reconcile that with the transaction that was logging on your blog shop. And that was the genesis of the API business. We were saying that I can automate orders. And then I can link up to your bank account. I can automate the process of downloading your bank statement. And how we do it was really, really fascinating. I still remember the early days. We built a web crawler that does the work that a human does. Because what they will do is they will log into the internet portal, download this CSV file, and then try to pass it to the intern, right? So we built a web crawler that basically log into the bank portal for them, download their bank statement on their behalf, and then process everything. That's how it works.
How did you handle the security, right? So how did you get their password and their login and stuff like that and still make sure that it was secure so that you could actually download that CSV file?
Perfect. Great question. So I was fortunate enough. The founding team was 4 engineers and 1 lawyer, right? So my co-founder still with me is a head of legal right now. And we were solving this problem. We're like, exactly, like how do we even log in and legally be able to do that? And we read through the term and condition of all the internet banking portal. I think to ask your user to diverge that for you is a sensitive part. But if you are logging it for your own account, you're absolutely allowed to do whatever you want because it's your account and your money. So what we actually do is that we then incorporate a company. The company create an internet banking account, and we were logging in as ourselves to check all the transaction. And we routed the transaction. We asked the users, instead of transferring to the individual company's bank account,
to transfer to you.
Transfer to us, right? We are the guys that's logging into our own bank portal to read our own bank statement. That's not against the terms and conditions of the bank. And when the bank find out, they're like, what you guys were doing? It's crazy. But then at the same time, they were like, okay, it's not really violation of anything. And then, of course, we had to work out the compliance side of this thing in terms of AML controls and everything.
And mixing funds and stuff like that.
Exactly.
At some point, though, if the company's growing fast, the amount of payments that are going through just that one bank account could have been huge. Reconciling is not hard, right? Because you're just doing it in an automated way. You're just matching. But just the sheer size must have confused the bank a little bit, no?
Absolutely. It's not just confusing the bank, it crashed the bank. In the early days, we were like known to be the guy that the bank's IT department was freaking out with, right? Like, not mentioning the exact bank because I think it would be a bit offensive, but a
That's
couple
okay.
of banks that are not that great with the IT system cannot bang us. And we have to keep changing bank account because like we broke a couple of banks until we found a bank that's willing to work with us. They're like, what exactly were you guys doing? Why were you logging into your bank portal every 30 seconds and refreshing the page every minute? They're like,
because it looks like drug dealing or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Not in a, I don't mean that in a funny way. I just mean like it's not normal. Normal people are not logging into their bank account every 30 seconds, right?
Yeah, and we were just like randomizing it, and to the point that they couldn't tell. They thought that it was human doing that, and they were just asking questions like, "Why were you refreshing your page every minute or so?" Right? Like I was trying to download my bank statement because somebody was transferring me fund, and they can see that, and it, to the point that they were like, "Okay, I think your model of usage is just a bit more crazy that we can afford, so we have to then work out how can we find a bank that eventually want to work with us." And then, of course, the AML and control and the compliance side become a very big part of the business. So it took us about 5 years to fast forward to where eventually StraitsX happened, right? Which is we eventually the scale of the business was so large, we have to make sure the bank fully understand our business model, able to work with us closely, and the regulators, because the transaction volume that we are processing had reached the high. I think we were the first fintech in Singapore under the X was previously to basically being granted what in the old regime known as a widely accepted stock value facility. So we were working very closely with the regulators, and that's actually the DNA of the company, right? In the early days when I was talking to MES about our business, and I was getting kudos to them, and they were graceful enough to really hear from an entrepreneur, those engineers that's trying to make it work, right? That what exactly were you guys doing? Because the regulation then was written was very suitable for a large enterprise and a company. So the license that were first given out, which is the widely accepted stock value facility, was designed for the likes of big organization like Nets, like EasyLink, right? They weren't very suitable for startup. So they was very surprised that a small company like us were really hitting the limits of what you can do without applying for a license, because they used to have this exemption policy that if you're less than 30 million in terms of transaction volume, you can just operate without a full license. But we were like constantly hitting the ceiling. And it took us 5 years, right, of a slow process. First, they hear about you guys, then they recognize you guys, and they want to work with you guys. They understand that, hey, there is a legitimate business here, there's a demand here. We need to come out with the right regulation to allow you guys to properly operate, which is the story of us, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I want to ask you. When you first started, you said it was just a bunch of engineers. Obviously, your lawyer was there too. And you didn't even go to the banks to try to figure out how to connect to them. You just did a whole bunch of work on your own and figured a whole bunch of stuff out. And 5 years later, then you're like, wait a second, we're just getting too big. And now the banks are noticing. And remember, you were right. You probably broke the bank because the banking system itself wasn't set up to do what you were doing. They didn't anticipate you as a client or your business. But once you started communicating with the banks and they started realizing, as you said, this is not just a legit business, but it's actually a real thing that real people need.
Exactly.
Right? For real reasons. How did like the way you build the business change? I get the regulators and MAS, you're right, are fabulous, right? Very forward thinking, very flexible, pro business in a way that like a lot of the other monetary authorities globally aren't. So that part I understand. But I'm more interested in you and the founding team now saying, now that we have the connectivity with the banks, what do we really want to know and what should we change in our business to actually make it even better and bigger? Is that fair?
That's fair. So actually, in some sense, that's how it leads to StraitsX itself, right? So fast forward 5 years since the genesis of the company. So we started I quit my job in 2015, and I got into Y Combinator. So
you did?
I did. And the funny part is a story there too. I quit my job on April 1st. And joined Y Combinator April 1st. And I still remember the conversation I had with my boss at Amazon.
Like, are you serious?
I'm serious, right? He was like, you quit your job on April 1st? Is this an April Fool joke?
It's a joke, yeah, right.
Yeah, but no, we really left the job at April 1st. So then we started YC, and we came back 2016, right, to really full-time started the company. We were very fortunate then. The ecosystem was right. We got funding from both Y Combinator and then followed up by Golden Gate Ventures. A few other VCs really supported this company in the early stage, right? And then you fast forward to about 2019 where the licenses was coming in, right? The regulators recognize that company like us needs to be around. And once the licenses comes in, it enable a whole different phase of growth for us, right? Because at the same time, the banks see more legitimacy, our compliance was up to standard, and more clients were willing to reach out to us to work with us. But that's also at the same time where we see that there's more responsibility we have to play here. But at the same time, there's also a market demand coming in from the Web3 space with blockchain space, right? So we in our early days, we serve e-commerce company, crowdfunding campaign, fintech, and a segment of the fintech, and today they're still a pretty big segment for us. We're blockchain company, and we were talking about cryptocurrency exchanges here, right? They have needs like this too. They need to have a way to connect to the retail by receiving bank payment. And then when your exchanges, if you offload your cryptocurrency, send it back to your bank account, right? So that was the genesis, right? They constantly connect to us and we're using our rails. But eventually they will tell you, right, if you understand how the blockchain stuff work, they needed something that's natively working on the blockchain itself, right? Instead of having to connect back to you, because it kind of like everything is supposed to be decentralized, everything is supposed to be on chain. And the value of that, which we were coming to that, right, is it's supposed to be programmable. It's
right. Like if they're being true to themselves and to their message, they don't want to have this like back end system that's not part of their front end system and their story that says it's all decentralized. It should be part of the same thing, right? Fundamentally. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. If you ask me, so this is where we see as the reason what I was giving the background is we are a payment company at heart. We are engineers at heart. We are just trying to solve real world problem. Yeah. And when we first saw the whole entire blockchain innovation, the geeky part of it, we like to play around with it, and of course we get pretty excited. But we are practical guys, right? We're pragmatical, right? We're saying that what exactly does it actually do? And one thing that we over the years have distilled down that why we were doubling down on this part of the technology side is if you understand payments, which we are now have a little bit more understanding. We've been doing this for 10 years. Is all payments traditionally are done in two flows, right? There's a communication layer, which we connect to each other via TCP/IP, all the jargons work and stuff. When you are making a payment, transaction have to be communicated real time, so that the merchant will be able to give you your goods and services immediately. But then there's a second part flow, which is a settlement. A settlement usually happens offline, and it can be 2 to 3 days or even a week later, right? So I can get my payment when you buy a coffee from Starbucks. You tap your card, it's a payment communication, like that the payment is going to go through. You get your coffee, you walk on. But Starbucks might only receive his payment settlement in his bank account 3 to 5 days or even a week later, right? That's how traditionally payment work. But when
T+2, T+3.
But if you brought on the paradigm of blockchain payment, this changes because on our blockchain side, especially with stablecoin, a payment itself is both a communication and a settlement. So, for example, when you send your stablecoin from your wallet address to the merchant wallet address, he get a communication part that he can give you the goods and services, but he also immediately get finality. He knows that the assets have reached his own wallet. He can go on to basically use it to make other payments. He does not have to wait for that 2 and 3 days. So that is the game changer part first that we notice in this settlement and part of this whole story, right?
What chain are you on?
Oh, we are on multiple different chains. We are on Ethereum, Hedera, Polygon. Avalanche is launching next week itself. So the chain itself, the way we see it, again, it's just different ecosystem and it's a back-end innovation, right? And a big part of this, does the user really want to know, especially the mom and pop that's using this on the payment side? Of course, on the developer front, there's a lot more innovation that can happen because of the different characteristic of different ecosystem. But the end of the day here is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve for the end user is always at the heart of what we think, right? We think that the settlement delay that now can make it instant is actually a very big value add from the existing system that we're working on. If you think of it from a cross-border perspective, which I'm happy to share more about, this problem it becomes even more important, right? Because especially for cross-border use cases, can you imagine if you're using your credit card from your home country, buying a coffee at another country, like say in Indonesia from Singapore? Yeah. The transaction delay in terms of communication and settlement expose you to FX risk, which makes the merchant needs to mark up the transaction. And that's why the FX rate is not that great, right? Because the time that you confirm the payment versus the time somebody actually pay them, there might be fluctuation already of 0.5%. Yeah.
And they're not FX traders. That's not how they're supposed to be making their money. They're supposed to be making their money by selling coffee or whatever it is they're selling. Yeah. So fair enough.
Exactly. So that's the first part of why we think the blockchain side and payment and stablecoin will help to change some of this whole thing. And of course, if you
Right.
then add in, which is another part of that's very true to our heart, the programmability part and the decentralized nature of the blockchain itself, it introduced a lot more capability, right? That a lot of things that in the past will be difficult to be done can be now be programmed on chain because the chain is Turing complete. So we demonstrated that over the last few years. Like you can do a digital voucher with custom, in terms of expiration date, promotion, all baked into a smart contract that allows it to be passed along to different wallets. And instead of having all this business logic that only works within a single wallet, now it can be written into a smart contract and be shared around. And the interoperability nature of this is make it extremely powerful, which actually aligns with the things I was talking about when I first came back, right? Because the ability to unlock developers and innovators to be able to build things without having to talk to a centralized entity and spend months and months negotiating is the essence of how the company started. Remember? Because when we started this, I didn't talk to the banks, I didn't talk to the regulators. I was just figuring out how to make it work. And to a lot of innovators and to a lot of engineers, that is actually is a lot easier for them. Personally,
Sure.
of course, things have evolved over the years for me myself. But when I first started, it's a lot easier for me to talk to the software because I know it can work. Then I was trying to justify to you the business case and explain to you why this makes more sense when I can actually show you that it's already working. And the blockchain part really helped to
Okay.
solve this in a different scale. Yeah.
Who are your biggest customers then today?
Yeah.
And did
So
it change from when it was Xfer to StraitsX? Does the customer mix change?
Of course, it does.
Tell me.
So when we first started, like I said, we were just, if you really understand this in a very simple term, we are a payment gateway, right?
Yep.
We're just
Yep.
helping.
Really simplistically. Yeah.
Yeah, very basically, we are helping e-commerce, fintech, whoever
Yep.
collect payment. And eventually, we became a payment infrastructure guy because besides collecting payment, we will help you with dispersing of funds, managing your e-wallet. So we are like a payment infra that's on top of the bank, right? So our client were basically other fintech customers, e-commerce, remittance company, blockchain exchanges, crowdfunding campaign. So we do that a lot in Singapore itself, right? Of course, we expanded the business into Indonesia, which I spent quite a bit of my time since 2019. Before the COVID, I used to travel there every single week, and we will become a payment acquirer, right? So we help small SME, like you mentioned earlier on, to collect payments, right? So Singapore, for example, we evolved and started to collect payment for offline pay now acquiring. So this can be a mom and pop store that's simply accepting pay now as a form of payment for their goods and services. And it
Right.
can also be the same thing for Indonesia, right? When we're helping a small warung or a small shopkeeper collect offline payment via digital form. Like in this case, in Indonesia, they call it Kris. So that's a big part of the business as we evolve over the year. But as you move
Got it.
on along those lines, where we started StraitsX itself, we are targeting a more niche area of appliances in the Web3 space, right? Because what happens is some of these folks in the blockchain side will need a lot more ability for them to interact with the blockchain, and they will like a product that's natively issued on the blockchain itself, and that's where
Right.
stablecoins comes in. Yeah, giving
Okay.
them ability to program that becomes a huge part of the business. But I think the next phase is what we are seeing is that this should come together, right? Because ultimately, we really see all this blockchain and all these back-end things as a back-end innovation, right? We shouldn't be thinking about trying to educate everyone about, hey, what is a stablecoin? What is a blockchain? Because to most of these users, like my mom and my parents, they just want to know, how do I pay? Can I just scan
Right.
and move on with their life?
It's funny because you mentioned this earlier. You mentioned TCP/IP earlier, right? And for people that aren't Unix geeks, like they have no idea what you're talking about.
Absolutely
I do
not.
because I was actually a systems administrator for a floor of like 100 Sun workstations back in the late 90s. So I know what you're talking about. But you're right. If you had to sit down and tell people that like everything that goes over the internet is using TCP/IP, you'd be wasting your time. In the same way that nobody understands how Swift works or any of these other banking protocols work, nobody
Yeah.
cares. And are you suggesting that on the StraitsX platform that you've kind of merged these two things together? So there are stable coins, but I can also just pay in Indonesian rupiah. Same thing, yeah? And nobody knows the difference. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
So of course, so on the StraitsX side, because of the brand and the way that we have targeted the Web3 native customers,
Yep.
right? So there's a bit more what we call Web3 features where you will be more familiar with for Web3 native users like MetaMask, using blockchain address. But at least on the group level, which is what we are heading towards as a payment company, we're trying to take that away from the end user itself, right? I like your point, right? Exactly on this whole TCP/IP I was mentioning around. Because what we are noticing is that it's the same paradigm I had given previously. When I was in Bay Area in 2010, there was this dot-com bubble burst, right? But just a few years before that, people were all telling you that, hey, I'm going to quit my job and start an internet company, right? That's a big thing then. But like now you're hearing the same hype, right? You're telling people that I want to start a Web3 company.
Right.
But if you think about it, it's going to be ridiculous today if you tell your friend that you're quitting your job to start an internet company. Everything happened on the internet.
Right.
And we believe it's the same thing, right? Because the end users really don't care how does it work, right? They just take out their app and make it work. So this is where we are trying to shift the narrative that Web3 and StraitsX is going to be focusing on that to what exactly are we trying to do, which is payment, right? And that is the direction that the company is going, right? And to bring you an example, what is happening here is we're working this year with the likes of and Grab, and this is already a 2 years project, right? It all first started during 2022 during the FinTech Festival that we work with MAS under the umbrella of Project Orchid under the concept of purpose-bound money. We were doing this to help them showcase a real-world use case of programmable money, right, where people was able to interact with this so-called digital blockchain money without the fear of it, right? So the first genesis iteration of that was simply giving every participant of the FinTech Festival a digital voucher instead of Sing dollars, right? That they can use this to pay for goods and services at the convention hall. So about 40,000 participants of the FinTech Festival, which happens every year in November, when they came to the convention hall, when they register for their account and get the tab, they were told that they can use any wallet, Web3 wallet of their choice, and can create one on the fly, right? And then immediately be so-called airdrop, given this digital voucher, which they can use to pay for goods and services, in this case, F&B beverages, at about 20 outlets on the convention hall. So they can buy a coffee, they can buy a pizza, right? So that's what they've been doing over the 3-day event. And we demonstrated the programmable nature of this whole thing, right? Where all these vouchers have baked-in denomination. They're $5, $2, $10. All these vouchers have expiration date, right? Beyond the 7 days, it will just stop working. So there's no concern about AML risk on that itself. And they were very used for very specific use case. You can only use it to pay for goods and services at the convention hall. So that was the start of it, right? So of course, over the years, it evolved. So last year, we launched it with Grab. So Grab users in Singapore were able to create a Web3 wallet and use it to basically purchase vouchers again that allows them to shop at a discount at about 200 outlets across Singapore. And some of the most popular outlets were like Koi Bubble Tea or Jumbo Seafood, right? So these are things that the end users are very used to, right? I buy a voucher at a discount, I can pay for it, right? At this participating outlet for goods and services. But this year, you will see this evolving to the next stage itself, and it's no longer going to be a trial. What is going to happen here is we have partnered with both Grab and Ant Group and International, right? Where it allows basically Alipay Plus, right, which is a network of wallets, e-wallet player across this region, with starting from Alipay China, Alipay Hong Kong, Touch and Go in Malaysia itself. The user of all these wallets, when they come to Singapore, using their native e-wallet, they will be able to walk up to any Grab outlet, in this case Grab Pay outlets, to scan and pay as though they were making normal payment to the way that they were very used to. So today, if you are Alipay users, you will see a Alipay sign, scan the Alipay QR code, enter the Sing dollar that you would like to pay, and just press confirm, right? That will be the exact same user experience.
Right. So talk to me then what happens on the currency side, right? Because if you're coming from China, if you're coming from Indonesia or wherever you're coming from, what happens on the currency side?
Exactly. So from the app itself, they will be seeing the FX rate code real time in the native currency that they come from. If they're in China, you will give them in CNY. If you're in Malaysia, you'll give you the rates in MYR. So to them, they will know that they were just paying in their local currency at the exchange rate that they can immediately attest to. And once they click confirm, payments is completed. And then on the merchant side, in this case, Grab merchant, this is Grab Pay. They don't understand anything about Ali. They don't understand anything about blockchain. They don't care. Their EDC will just show up that Grab Pay, let's say it's $5, is received real time. And then they will give them the goods and services via coffee or pay for food, right? So that is the experience that we are trying to bring more mainstream. Like as you can imagine, the whole flow we just talked about is a payment flow that
you and I are very used to, right, these days in this part of the world, right? Actually,
Yeah.
if you look at the stats, digitalization is actually happening at a tremendous pace in this part of the world compared to the rest of the world, right? Actually, with the big push of COVID, about 46% of Asian Pacific populations are already online, and they have been used to paying with a digital wallet, of course, in their own native currency, right? In Singapore, I'm very used to GrabPay. In Indonesia, you might be used to GoPay or Dana app, right? So this is happening already, and a lot of people are very used to scanning and paying. But what is actually happening right now, like just going back to the experience I was talking about, they're now able to do this cross-border.
Yeah.
And behind the scene, this is where the stable coin and the FX settlement and the real-time settlement that I talked about earlier on will happen magically behind the scene, which is obfuscated to the end users. What they do not know is actually on the confirmation on the Ali side, XSGD, which is a stable coin that is issued by us, will be sent from the operating wallet of N to the merchant wallet real time, which will help to immediately with the settlement and also logging in the FX rate, right? Because if the FX rate is in 5 Sing dollar, the merchant expect to receive it in 5 XSGD, which is always 1-to-1. And settlement finality happen at that point because they do not have to worry that what is the FX that you might pay me 3 days later. I just know that I'm going to get a stable coin and my back end is settled. But again, that the merchant don't even know that. They just know that the payment have went through, right? Because the Grab side work with us to actually settle that real time.
Yeah, so the merchant, the Grab merchant doesn't need to know whether it's an F&B thing, right? Like you said, the bubble tea or whatever it is. They don't even need to know that anything's changed. The only thing that's changed is on the back end with Grab itself integrates the StraitsX system. Mm-hmm. And in a way, it disintermediates some of their FX risk as well, right? Because if they had some, like you said, there are 2 layers to this. It's the communication layer saying you're going to be getting a payment, and then the settlement layer going, here is the payment. And if there's no gap between them, I guess the stablecoin kind of disintermediates some of that FX risk. And that's something that Grab's willing to implement without kind of anybody needing to know.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, so like you see, the real business case here, right, for a company like Grab is what you just mentioned. First and foremost is they take away the FX risk that they typically have to deal with. And that's something that the wallet operators, in this case can be the Ali or the Touch and Go, will have to settle that, right? And then on their end, they just know that as long as the back end connection is being achieved on the blockchain, XSGD is arrived and it will be converted to Sing dollar of the exact same amount, they will be able to deal with their merchant in terms of settlement exactly the same. But what they get right now is faster settlement, right? Because typically, if you do it in the other network itself, it might take 3 to 7 days for the funds to reach them. There will be T+2 as well. Like I say, that's the industrial rate. But for cross-border, that's typically slower. But they enjoy faster settlement right now. But then think about what actually enabled them to do beyond that. Because of the interoperability and the programmable nature of the blockchain, they get additional stuff, right? Now, a small developer from Bangladesh or in India will be able to say that I can build an app that is on this blockchain itself, and I can walk up to Grab and scan and pay, and it just works because I do not need to talk to Grab. Because I know that through the Grab QR code, I will be able to get a blockchain address that says that as long as you send me XSGD, payment will go through. Of course, all the AML control, again, is already baked into the smart contract. That will be taken care of. But it enables this interoperability that we've been describing and about, right? All the wallet operators will be able to come in and do this. And on top of that, the third point, they can build in the programmability part of this. All these digital vouchers, all this discount can be baked into the smart contract that allows that to happen as well.
So you said earlier that you issued your own stablecoin. Did I hear that correctly?
That is correct.
What are the risks to you, to StraitsX, of having your own stablecoin and having to maintain your own stablecoin? What are the risks there, or some of the challenges there, right? Because it's not just a gimme that it's going to be fine, yeah?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So this is a long journey, right? So we started this StraitsX project in 2019, actually. So after we secure our licenses from the MES as an authorized widely accepted stock value facility. It's a mouthful now. It is actually just
it down, but yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is. If you convert it to the layman today, it's e-money, right? So we got an e-money license in Singapore, right? So at the back of the e-money licenses in 2019, and of course, like I said, we felt that there's more responsibility that we need to do now in terms of regulatory compliance. But at the same time, the industry is moving, and there's a lot of demand coming from all these exchanges talking about the innovation that it can be enabled that I just talked about for stablecoin. So they look to us to try and give them a solution. And that, again, kudos to MES. We again work with them very closely. We came and talked to them that, hey, if this is in the early days, remind you that none of us really quite figured this out yet. We kind of work with them and convince them that the regulation around e-money can be achieved if we were just to see it that this is just a tech evolvement. Again, no need to talk about any changes in regulation. The only key part differences between the way that we do the e-money in the past versus what is happening now is that the ledger, the record of all these transactions or the database move onto the blockchain. That's how we started in 2019. We were convincing the regulator that there is no difference in the regulation around a typical e-money versus a stablecoin.
Just the place where it sits is different. Yeah,
exactly. And the layman term then we use is that this is just e-money on the blockchain, right? That's how easy it can be understood. Of course, it have fast forward to these days that more regulation is coming out to make sure this is properly addressed. But actually, it does not change much. I think in a recent discussion that or in last year's FinTech Festival, MES was actually again very forward-looking, and I like the way that they distill things down for a lot of laymen to see how what they call the Web 2 versus the Web 3 world. I don't really like that word, but just the simplest way to let people explain that in the traditional finance that we are already used to, there's really three types of money, right? You see this talking about the central bank money, that is money that is being used between banks, right? That we are quite used to. That I think only the banks touches this. They have ability to get access to central bank money to allow for settlement between banks, right? So that is central bank money, which is in the traditional world. And then there is, of course, private bank money. So if you think about it, right, when you have a bank account with DBS or you have a bank account with UOB, actually individually they are creating their own money supply because they do fractional lending, right? So actually these are private, reserve banking, right? They are private bank money that's belonging to the individual bank. And of course, then there's a third pool that we are all used to, which is e-money. E-money wallet operator like us has already been a big part of this whole digitalization of the last 10 years. As I mentioned, 46% of the Asia Pacific users are very used to e-money. And the concept is that you put the money in the bank, it's fully guaranteed by a bank, and I give you a digital version of that, and you can use it on the e-wallet. So you really see these three pools of different money type. And in the Web3 world, there is going to be a mirror of that. And that's what MES has been talking about, right? You're going to start seeing them talking about wholesale CBDC, right? Which is basically a one-to-one mapping of this central bank money. You're basically digitizing that onto the blockchain, and it's something that's going to be available only for banks and also for maybe countries, right? For cross-border country-to-country settlement. So you're going to have a one-to-one mirroring of that. You're going to have, like I mentioned earlier on, private bank money. The version of that you're going to start hearing more of them talk about from regulators around the world is tokenized bank deposit, right? Basically, individual bank will be minting their own token. And you already see the first of that. JP Morgan started to have JP Morgan coin, right? So there will be a mirror of that as well. And then there comes the third class, which is e-money players like us now are going to be well-regulated e-money stablecoin issuer, right? Which is a license regime that MES has granted us in November. We are granted an in-principle license by MES to be given a new regime and a new license for issuing of well-regulated stablecoin out of Singapore. And that, of course, bring about more responsibility. But as you can see, this is how things in the regulation have been evolving over the last few years, right? That we are seeing a mirror. Actually, again, the heart of it is the same thing. This is a tech play. There's not much changes, again, in the way that all this regime is regulating from a money perspective. Like I say, central bank money is only done by the central bank. Private bank money have their own guardrails. They have to keep certain reserve ratio. And for e-money players, everything needs to be one-to-one back. You can't print money out of this. It's just that the tech medium have changes. Instead of trying to talk about it on a centralized database, like I say, I'm techie, I'll tell you it's like MySQL database or RDS. It's translated to, it's exactly the same thing, but it's now being done on the blockchain. And to most laymen and end users, they will not learn about this. They will not need to understand this. It will be just an application that the developer will develop or companies will show to them that brings about, ideally, faster settlement, better user experience, and lower price.
I mean, at some level, isn't this the same equivalency, although much simpler, between like regular mail, where I write something down, put an address on it, put a stamp on it, and send it to you, and then email, which is just more fully, it's just a tech difference. The philosophy is no different at all. Exactly. And the only thing is that email has way more functionality built into it because it's programmable. I could do all these other things there that I couldn't do before that I really wanted to do. but it doesn't change the fundamental idea of that I'm trying to send you a message. Is that fair?
Exactly. If you think about it, then at the crux of it, this is what the so-called blockchain or Web3 innovation, that if we distill it down, it's a tech improvement, right?
Yeah.
And for as all tech improvement, over the years, the magic is when all the technology disappear, right? The end users, majority of the end users will never need to know how it actually works. They just need to understand that the user experience must be more superior. They get their services that they want to render easier or faster. And that's it, right? And at the back end, for the developers, that will be something that they'll be more interested in. But the way the developers and all the engineers will be looking at it is, how is this allowing them to be able to innovate faster, innovate cheaper, and fail cheaper, right? That's all the way that we should be looking at. It's just like how internet have bring around a whole rise of a new way of doing things, and how like cloud computing have changes that. Again, do many of us actually know how cloud computing works? We don't really need that, but we are actually using it without knowing it. And that's how we see this thing will evolve in that direction.
Okay, I'm going to let you go. Tianwei Liu, this was a really fascinating conversation. A co-founder and CEO of StraitsX. You've got to come back. I mean, we could have gone, I think, for another hour, but this is really great. I'd love to have more updates. I cannot thank you enough for coming and doing this. I learned a lot. I had fun, and I hope you did as well.